Lemongrass Girl is the latest film by Bunsermvicha, a filmmaker and producer based in Thailand. In 2014, she joined Electric Eel Films, the production company behind films by Anocha Suwichakornpong and Tulapap Sayanjarun, that have been presented at previous editions of IFFR. The world premiere of Lemongrass Girl marks her first appearance at IFFR. Rosalia Namsai Engchuan is a social anthropologist and filmmaker based between Berlin and Southeast Asia. She is currently pursuing her PhD at the Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology in Halle, Germany.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for sharing your film and making the film. And I'm really excited to talk about it with you actually. I think it's a really amazing behind the scenes kind of insight into the filmmaking community in Thailand. And I like that it is kind of speaking from a very specific milieu, but it also speaks to much broader questions of gender relations and everything. And I think maybe we can just get started that you tell us a little bit more about the story of this film, your inspiration, also motivation to make it, and also who were you working with in making the film, because it's never only one person, obviously. Yeah, maybe we can just start with that.
Okay. So the film was shot about 2 years ago when Anosha Suwichakornpong, or Pimai, we call her Pimai in Thailand, when she was making her feature film Come Here. And the film, or the idea of the film, kind of came together through a conversations that we had. We have heard a lot about, we've seen the Thai superstition on film sets. The Thai superstition is something quite well known in our country. I think most people have heard of it, and it's practiced still today in the countryside, in the suburbs, in the city. Whenever there's like an outdoor event, somebody will kind of be like, hey, you find somebody to go put the lemongrass in the ground. And on film sets, I don't know if you've been on a few that have practiced this. Like I have never really planted it myself, but I've been there when someone has. And yeah, so I think we wanted to talk about it and to kind of show what it would, or to kind of show what it's like for the person to have to go through it, basically, from their perspective. And Anosha wrote the script, but it was kind of like we all brainstormed, and like the producers, the associate producers, the everybody kind of talked about it, and we were like, oh, here are all of our experiences from haven't seen this happen. Like this happened on this film set, this happened on the other film set, and we kind of like put the story together through conversations, and Anosha put it on paper. And yeah, that's kind of how it started.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I've been doing research in Indonesia and was on a lot of film set there, and this kind of like supernatural rituals also play a role on film sets there, also related to the rain, but it's very different. And I guess it doesn't have this gendered dimension. I would be very curious how it was for you to do the research on the ritual, but also how you went along in filming it, kind of like reenacting or performing something for the camera that potentially has some effects.
Yeah, it was, I think that's the most interesting part for me, because well, the research I kind of talk to people. I think it's just because everybody kind of knows, but I also did like research formally and learned a lot about how, like, you know, this superstition have been practiced for centuries. People back in the day like really believe that this is a test for a female virgin. Like if it rains, it means that she's not pure. And they will call off marriages even back in the day because they're like, you are not what you said you were, you know? And so it's very interesting for me to see that and still see it practiced today as like something practical. You know, like on a film set, you do it because you don't want it to rain. You need to keep filming. And if it rains, then you have to stop. But while to answer your second question, while filming it, so I worked with Harini Butrasi, this female cinematographer, and she was filming mainly the fictional part, following the script. But I was the one filming the documentary aspect of it. I was kind of following Piano around everywhere. And Piano was really just playing herself. She was actually working on the film as a production manager. She actually had lots to do. And I was following her around and be like, hey, can you like change into this outfit? Like, or whatever, you know? And at one point, Piano was kind of like, I don't think I can film today. I'm too stressed with work, you know? But yeah, it was very interesting because I would kind of catch moments where she was just working and dealing with problems and issues and what, you know, of being a production manager. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. This is now a question that it just came to my mind. It's a bit off the film, but also relating to other films in recent Thai cinemas. And it's just something that I observed that there's a lot of films where the film set kind of becomes the set for a film. And yeah, I'm thinking about Yossi's film now on the death of the sound man, or also Anocha had that in her previous works as well. So I think it's very interesting because in a way it also makes a comment, regardless of the content, which is very different, on the constructedness of images, and it reminds us constantly that the images that we see are constructed. And I was wondering if maybe particular in the Thai context there is a motivation to be very reflexive of this process of constructing images and of the process of doing this itself.
That's such a hard question. I that's such a hard question. I think I don't know. I feel like yes, like formally to answer that question, I guess, because other directors do it too. I think that it's film sets are just very interesting. That's kind of how I feel. It's like everybody comes together to do this one thing. And it's very chaotic, you know, like before somebody calls like sound, action, like everybody's running around trying to make things work. Everybody's trying to do their job. And then the moment someone calls action, everybody has to stop except whatever unfolds in front of the camera. And I think that aspect of it was something that I wanted to explore as well in the film, but I don't know how well I achieved it, but that aspect is something that was interesting for me as when I was filming it, documenting everything. And I feel like when you're part of that, there's a rhythm to filming, and when you kind of see, you know, I think the first time anybody works on a film set, you kind of are quite shocked by how everything works, you know, like there are so many nuances and aspects of how everything comes together. Everybody has their own responsibilities and things they need to do in order for it to flow. And yeah, once you are used to it, I think it feels like a very interesting kind of routine that you do. I don't know if I answer that well, but
yeah, definitely, yeah. It's interesting to see how it comes from like the film within the film kind of. And this, so when you were starting, because you said you were just following her and documenting, so this was also kind of an open-ended process of, I mean, it was scripted, but still it was kind of had this like open going with the flow of the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think Anosha wrote scenes, that could help with the story. And I think she left a lot of space for things to happen, and that's really nice. I think yeah, that yeah.
Another dimension that I think this film really asks for talking about a little bit more is, of course, the gender dimensions, and also the double standard when it comes to the value of virginity in Thailand. And there's one thing that I find very, very interesting, and this also comes from research that I've been doing on the notion of like ideal sexuality or tabooness of feminine sexuality in Thailand, which is that in this valuation of female virginity is in essence a very Western value historically that came during the times of colonialism, when upper classes tried to kind of like fulfill this Victorian model of conservative sexuality. But also during the HIV pandemic, there was a lot of influence by Western researchers who came to Thailand and measured Thai behaviors against the Western benchmark, essentially. So there is some research that in the past the phenomenon was there of like sexual activities before marriage, but it wasn't seen as a problem. And it is very much seen as a problem now in a discourse that kind of goes back to tradition and essential Thainess. And I think it's very interesting because if you trace it back historically, it's not really that. But still then, and this is why I really like the film, it becomes so interesting because it then is entangled with this ritual, which is then in fact kind of almost like a technology to reinforce patriarchy. Speaking about the history and about the maybe not so traditional Thainess of this value, but also the ritual. And I would be interested in your experience, or also the conversations you have with your friends and with your colleagues, how you feel about gender double standards in Thailand today, because it seems to be like from the protagonists, what we get is this kind of ambiguous relationship with it. They don't really take it seriously, but they still do it, and they don't want to perform it, but like someone has to. So there's a very like ambiguous relationship with this, and I would be interested in your personal experience, and also comment on this broader topic of gender in Thailand.
This is hard to talk about because I think that I'm surprised actually to hear about the Western influence on sexuality in Thailand. But in terms of gender, I think it's so rooted in our culture, in our language, in all of the traditions there are, and also because Thai society, or how we interact with one another, it's constructed on like a hierarchy. There's always somebody older than you that you have to pay respect to. I think that plays a big part in gender as well, because in terms of inequality, the patriarchy really plays in all aspects of life. And it dictates the relationships, the way that people interact with one another. Like in the film, it's a male producer, who asks Piano to do this, and I think it doesn't really matter. I think on the other hand, the film happens on a film set that's directed by a female director. I feel like it doesn't really matter which gender is kind of in position necessarily, but when it comes to like the Lemongrass Girl story, it's so deeply rooted in the way that we understand things and in the way that society works, that Piano, even though she's like, it doesn't really matter, I think, from Piano's perspective, whether or not she's a virgin. But somebody has to kind of do it, you know? Somebody still has to, like you said, perform it, and fulfill kind of this expectation of traditions. Yeah. In terms of gender, I think it's inherent in the superstition itself, and I think that for the Lemongrass Girl, there's kind of no win. It's definitely when you're put in that position, it's kind of a lose-lose situation, because if it rains, then everybody will laugh at you, and they'll question, you know, you, and they'll be like, "Oh, you made this happen." But if it doesn't rain, everybody will still also laugh at you, because they'll tease you, like, you know, you like haven't done it, or you like, or whatever, you know. And I think it's the perfect example to show what it's like to kind of be a woman. Like, the expectation that society has of you, you still have to fulfill it, you still have to perform it, but it's never a winning situation. Either way, you are kind of subjected to the same kind of, I don't want to say harassment, but scrutiny in how in the way that you understand yourself, or who you are, or what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's just very beautifully put, and it's also what I got watching it. It's like, yeah, no matter what you actually do, it's a burden. Like, it doesn't even matter if it, because I think a lot of, I'm gonna go a bit beyond now, but a lot of discussions about superstition or the supernatural are always about, like, is it true or not? Like, does it work or not? But then within a Western framework where only, like, scientifically only what we can see can be proven, it's hard to prove it. But what the film really does in a very good way, I think, is showing it doesn't really matter. Like, it doesn't matter, as you said, like, if it rains, if it doesn't rain, like, there's still a burden to carry by piano in this case. Yeah, which is really interesting. Yeah, it's kind of sad also.
I think
Definitely.
it's really sad. I think it's really
Yeah,
sad. I think the
yeah.
first, like, I had actually had a really difficult time putting the film together, because
Mm,
I I felt like if I had done this differently, if it
mhm,
were like a fully fictional piece,
mhm,
and I am able to construct the tension in a way that will really make you feel what she feels, the film would be entirely different.
mhm.
But I think it's I learned a lot from making the film, because it could take so many directions, and also I think what's interesting as well, with what you were saying about what's real and what's not, right? The myth making um, is the form of Lemongrass Girl being both documentary and fiction.
Mhm.
But sometimes, you know, when people watch films that are hybrid, they'll be like, oh, is this real? Is this not real? Whatever. But in this film, it doesn't matter as well, because it's both real and not real at the same time. But what does that mean? You know? And I think that, in a way, I didn't think of this when I was making it, but after reflecting on it,
Mhm.
I think that the form itself, it allows us to also kind of comment on myth making, the
Yeah.
form of filmmaking, by combining all these elements.
Mm.
Yeah, it goes back again to piano, to the main character. it's real and it's not real, and you have to deal with it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and you have to think about what it means that it actually doesn't matter if it's real or not real. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. It's yeah, it's very interesting. It's a thought-provoking film, definitely. Yeah. um, I would also be interested, but I don't know if this is too much of a personal question.
That's okay.
But um, sometimes I'm wondering about, because I'm very much interested also in like filmmakers trajectories, and I also make films. So sometimes I feel like even like approaching a topic or processing it through making a film, especially when there is this documentary element to it, and when it concerns something that is really close to you, because you are a filmmaker in Thailand, and this is not a world that you just enter to extract information. It's basically your life. And was like, how was this process for you, or was there something that the film did for you personally? Because often the question is like, what do you want to convey to the audience? But what was your and your team's process, maybe, if there
Mm.
was any?
I think it was the first time. So before this, I had made something very like I've kind of made films in school, like in classes. But I didn't go to film school, but it was like I studied abroad in Prague, for example, at FAMU, and there is an entirely different way of making films. There, it's very formal, very traditional, and and then when I came back to Thailand, I made the film I made before this is a documentary, and I really really struggled with that process because I had a hard time constructing um, the narrative.
Mhm.
And I think this is the first time where I am able to kind of combine both and experimented with it. And I what I got out of it is basically I really loved it. It
Mhm.
was just so fun
Yeah.
because I love documenting in general.
Mhm.
I think you get so much out of it, and I yeah, so I think with the film I was able to kind of formally experience what it would be like to combine the elements. It was the first time I did, and in a way I think it was me finding my voice or kind of my approach to cinema,
Mm.
filmmaking.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah. And I think it's really a strong this kind of approach towards documentary that recognizes that there are some things like some larger truths or questions that, yeah, that you cannot just own, that you kind of need to elevate to this level of fiction or hybrid.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super interesting. um I had one. This is also not directly related to the film, but of course very much rooted in the film. And I would be interested to hear your perspective on this, because this film also in a way deals with this ritual like of linked to superstition, and often from, especially then showing this film in a Western context is kind of like different than showing it in Thailand, because in a Western context this would maybe be, yeah, be labeled as superstitious. But I guess in Thailand there are a lot of contexts when I think about all the spirits houses that you have here, and all like many different rituals that kind of cluster daily life in Thailand or many other countries in Southeast Asia too. And often like I'm interested or curious also in this idea that labeling these practices as like superstitious or something that needs to be overcome, which kind of in relation to the gender dilemma makes sense, but in a broader way of speaking about animism and superstition, it also kind of reproduces this Western modernity as the end goal, and anyone who still clings to these beliefs. And so now there's this whole movement of kind of like trying to question this maybe, and to see, I guess where I'm trying to go is, I'm wondering if you see, maybe not directly in the film, but in some kind of other context, also a positive potential where animism and like a world where someone like piano doesn't have to carry a burden, no matter if it's true or not, where this can come together, that doesn't necessarily follow this very westernized idea of we don't believe in anything that we can't see. Yeah.
Right. I was a bit concerned actually showing the film as what it is to a Western audience, because there isn't a kind of understanding of this superstition. I had a hard time actually in the film questioning whether like, will the audience understand that how this superstition even works, because and then I had to like show it to my friends in the US or in Europe and be like, what do you understand? Like, do you understand that it has to be a virgin or whatever? Because if you don't understand this one specific point, then you might lose the whole meaning of the film. And some people will kind of respond to me and be like, I understood it at this point, or like, I never got it. And I just kind of realized that I'm just gonna have to rely on or trust that like it will still work. But I think showing it to, but in terms of superstition, I think that is very often the film, like again, go back to what we were talking about earlier, but very often we question, is this real? Is this not real? We have to prove it, right? Like your point. And I think this film isn't really about that. This film is more about the effects of it and what it, and yeah, it's basically the effects of it on the people who live in a society where we all agree and believe that we still have to do this, and traditions that are passed down not only from generation to generation, but from film set to film set. And in terms of the Thai audience, I think I feel actually more comfortable showing it to a Thai audience, because I feel that they'll understand nuances of it. And they'll feel closer kind of to the experience, because it's something that maybe you've experienced before. And I remember going to do research, and in Thailand there's this website called Pantip, and yeah, and Pantip is where like everybody can kind of like post, a question, and people would just kind of respond. And I read so many stories of people's experiences having to do this, and how horrible it is for them, and what happened to them on those film sets. And so when it comes back to traditions and things that we may or may not want to pass down or continue, I think that it's hard to answer your question more like generally, is this better or worse? But I think that in each one, we definitely should think about and question it. Why are we planting lemongrass upside down under the open sky? Like, why? And even if, for me, again, it doesn't matter if it's real or not real. It's more why. And I believe that I think that beliefs and traditions can play a big role in how we live or understand each other in a society, in a country, in the world, right? But and it can have lots of benefits too. The things that like especially in Thailand, I grew up having to do so many things that along the way I questioned, why did I have to do this? And certain things were good for me, but I think that this specific superstition, no, I don't think I want to explain it. I don't think I want to explain it. It would be saying too much.
Okay. No,
Yeah.
but this was already really yeah, and you're totally right. Like there's no one superstition. It's very it really depends. There's so many, and it depends on the context and the situation. And this is what you do. You kind of zoom in into one specific story. And yeah, this exactly what you said, like just sums up also my experience of watching the film, that you just bypass this question of true or not, and you focus on what does it feel like. So maybe there can be also some empathy for someone who has to do it, who has to put the lemongrass. Yeah. I don't know if you have anything that you would like to share on the film that you feel like you would like audiences to know. I feel like I asked you a lot of confusing questions
No,
already.
you asked great questions, but they were
Yeah.
hard.
No, it's just yeah, I don't know. I watched the film and then so many things came up, and like I think also these are questions that are not necessarily to be answered, but more like to think more about. And it's amazing that your work triggers that process.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean,
Thank you.
add anything you would like to share, and thank you.
Um, I think that when you get to the end of the film, everybody have very different kind of responses to it, and I think it will speak for for what you believe or how you feel about it. Um, some people think that, yeah, that's it. I don't know how to conclude. I yeah, I'm really so glad that the film did that for you. I that means that I've done it successfully. I that's kind of all I wanted the film to do. And if it does that, then then it's amazing. I yeah, I had so much fun making the film. It was made with so much love and support, and everybody really kind of participated in it and made it happen. I think it wouldn't have happened if everybody, at least on the film set, kind of understood or trust me and the story to be told in the way that it did. Everybody that participated in it, performed, or played themselves in it. I'm very excited to actually show the film with them. Piano has refused to watch the film. She's waiting to watch it on the big screen, and I hope that we'll get to kind of show it here at one point, hopefully. But yeah, it's been a great journey, and I am so happy that the film is going to be showing here, and it will be shared with audiences there and hopefully more around the world. And if it opens up conversations and make us think about how we do what we do or why we do what we do, and the effects that have on us, and I think that at the end of it, it's everybody is an individual. I believe in that you can make your own choices, and even if you were under these kind of, even if you're in a society where people tell you this is what you have to do, I think that what I've really learned growing up in Thailand is learning to kind of reject what society tells me to do or how I'm supposed to be or live or So it's a bittersweet film.